Everybody to tonight's talk. Delighted to have Alistair Davidson of the UHI, electrician in Inverness College, on early years and especially in the area of play and particularly in the area of outdoor play. It's being recorded, so I hope everybody's okay with that. And we'll have time at the end for questions. So there's a presentation as well, so it's quite it should be quite an enjoyable talk. Thank you, Alistair. I'll hand straight over to you.
Okay, let's hope so. So I'm going to share my screen, but I'm watching on another laptop because I might ask you guys a few questions as well as I go along. Okay, and I thought I'd call this chat Summer of Play. Okay, a few reasons for that. That when I started discussing with DJ what we were going to do, that was the plan. Talk a little bit about play, about the importance of play. But there is actually a campaign going on at the moment called #Summer of Play. Okay, and the reason that is around, here are some of the reasons. That 51% of children are playing out with friends less than before the pandemic. And this isn't something that is just a result of the pandemic. It's been happening before that. It may be different in your own community, but I think it's a general trend that children are playing out less. So they're addressing this decline in play pre and post pandemic. Also to address a rise in mental health issues among young people. And that's been well documented, particularly over the last year. And you know, these are two big challenges we're facing at the moment, a rise in mental health issues and the climate crisis. And I believe that play has, particularly outdoor play, has a really important role to play. So that's why we should be making play a priority this summer. Just a little bit about me. That's me. 15 years experience in outdoor education. That's my background, you know, taking kids out rock climbing and canoeing. I moved from that into kind of the environmental sector, working for folk like the RSPB and eco schools. Then actually running my own small business that was about the link between Gaelic language and nature. I'm a parent, so I bring some of that experience. And I've run 2 outdoor nurseries, one in Inverness, one in Elgin. Currently lecturing at UHI in Inverness in childhood practice. I'm also an early years consultant. And I run a small group here in Fochabers. That's where I'm speaking to you from. It's called Grow and Play Fochabers, and it's about this idea that we need to get children out into our communities playing freely. And like I said, I have a connection to the islands. My granny was from North Uist. My auntie and uncle live in Stornoway. So I'll be actually leaving for North Uist next Tuesday. I thought I'd chop this into a few bits. So I'm going to look at play because we need to have a bit of an understanding first of what play actually is. What does it mean? Then why being in nature is the best place to play. We're also going to have a look at our view. And when I talk about our view, is we can't really talk about play or outdoor play without talking about how we view children in the first place. What do we think children are capable of, etc. And then the last thing is do. What can we do about it? So this summer, what can we do to get our kids out playing? Just a few headlines that I thought we'll see what's happening at the moment in the world of play. These are 2 or 3 headlines that I found recently. The top ones from the P&J, 7 weeks of freedom might be a childcare challenge. And I know your report was around childcare, DJ, and the challenge that poses in the local area. Our kids need this 7 weeks, right? They've had a tough year. A recent study has found that children are not allowed to play outside until 2 years older than their parents' generation. So Last generation was around 9 years old. So now the thought is that children are going to high school having never really been allowed to do their own thing unsupervised, which is crazy if you think back to your own childhood. And then this one here, young children are having panic attacks about play dates after lockdown. And that's again around this kind of mental health issue. So we'll explore some of these. But first we'll look at what's play, right? And this is a great picture. This is my daughter actually at one of the outdoor nurseries I worked at. And we threw a Formula One tyre into the field in the outdoor nursery. And about 3 minutes later, this is what they were doing. And, you know, they figured it out pretty quickly that a child fits perfectly inside a Formula One tyre. So, you know, this is about what is play really about. First thing to note is play is a right. It's Article 31 of the UNCRC. Children have a right to rest and play. And that's pretty important now with Scotland enshrining the UNCRC into Scots law. So we're going to have to think about, are we really giving our children the opportunity for real free play? Here's the dictionary definition of play. And I wonder if you agree with that definition or not, or what you think of it. It's for recreation rather than a serious or practical purpose. And if you want, you know, in the chat, or if you want in your microphone, what do you think about that? Do you agree with it?
Well, I'm glad you showed it. I've never actually thought about looking up the dictionary definition of play. Our culture isn't massively recreational, or it never used to be. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess one of the things I show my students this quite quickly, because as well as saying, yeah, it's enjoyment and recreation, and rather than serious or practical purpose, but I'd like to challenge that and say, well, actually, to a child, play is pretty darn serious, right? And there is great purpose to it as well. So my first thing would be to say, this is an okay definition, but I'm going to say it's not the right definition, because children play is serious and they're doing some serious stuff while they're at play. What is play and why do we play? Well, all animals play, okay, all mammals play. And the bigger the brain, the longer the animals play for. And before pre-industrialization and all these kind of things, you know, children would have played freely until about the teenage years, okay, till they were ready to join a community's work. So yeah. And why do we play? Well, you know, animals play to learn everything, how to hunt, how to be part of a group, and it's the same for children. We learn, that's great. Jenny's saying it's very important for happiness and development, and it's really through play that we develop. Now, play is pretty contentious in terms of what is play, and there's a psychologist called Peter Gray, and this is his definition of play. So something is play when it's self-directed or self-chosen by the child, okay, when it's intrinsically motivated, so that means it's come from within the child and the means are more valued than the end, okay, so it's not about producing a product, it's about what happens during the play. It's guided by mental rules, but rules leave room for creativity, and it's imaginative. So if a child is doing something and it doesn't tick these 4 boxes or 4 statements, then it's not really play, okay? And we quite often get mixed up here because say if I'm working in a nursery and I put the paper and pens out and ask the children to draw something in particular, you know, colour its eyes in green and all this kind of stuff, well, that's not play, okay? It has to come from within the child. What do you reckon? What's the opposite of play? Just what's the first thing that comes into your mind? Well, no, I like that. Yeah, a structured game, i.e. football. So it can be, if the game is, if the game's organised by a group of children themselves, then it's probably play. But if it's organised by an adult, then, you know, like a club, for example, where they go and train, that's not play. And I think quite often in society, what we do is we've replaced parts of play with organised things. Okay. Sometimes people say the opposite of play is work. There's some researchers that would say, DJ's just popped that in, that the opposite of play is depression. Okay, if you imagine a world without play, it's a pretty dark place. This is by no means a scientific graph here, right? But there is Peter Gray, whose definition of play we looked at. He states that from the 1950s, there's been a sharp rise in mental health issues among young people and a sharp decline in free outdoor play. And although we can't say one causes the other, there is some correlation there, okay? So the opposite of play being depression. So less play, the more issues that we come up against. And, you know, it's something that I see in my work. I'm going to give you two little stories just to emphasize how important play is. Dr. Stuart Brown, who would say the opposite of play is depression, first studied play in the 1960s. The family on the right, family on the left, family on the right are rats. The family on the left, the young man in the middle there is called Charles Whitman. Now, Charles Whitman was involved in one of the earliest mass shootings in the States. Okay, and it was quite a shock to the nation. They brought in a team of psychologists, which Stuart Brown was in one of them, and they began to systematically interview everybody in Charles Whitman's life to find out how could this young man do such a thing. So they asked his teachers and his friends and his neighbors, just everything about his life. And one of the things that they kept coming back to was that the people that they interviewed had never seen Charles Whitman play outside freely, okay? And they actually, when they wrote the report on this tragedy, this was one of the key reasons they came up with. Obviously, it was coupled with lots of other things, but they found that play, being denied play, was one of the reasons this had happened. Stuart Brown went on to interview in local prisons the most violent offenders, and he found that this was not something that was isolated. Everybody that he interviewed had been denied some aspect of play as a child, particularly rough and tumble play. Okay, so it's pretty sobering, but it shows that play is of great importance. The rats there on the side, just another experiment that that has been done is they have two groups and they allow one to play freely and develop as normal as possible under laboratory conditions, and the other group, they deny play. And what happens is when they introduce a predator, the ones that have been denied play run away and hide, as do the normal rats. However, after some time, the normal rats come and start playing around and exploring their environment. The ones that have been denied play don't do anything. They just stay where they are until they die. So yeah, there's probably silence there. Play is extremely important. And what I often encourage people to do is think back to their own play memories. These are two pictures of my children in North Uist, and they're playing in places that I played as a young child. I'm taking the photos here, but when I was a child, I was unsupervised, playing with my brothers usually. On the left, we called that Castle Grayskull. We've spent hours steeped in imaginative play. And on the right, it's the dunes, I think, at the beach in Hosta. And we used to, jump down those for many hours. And this is a long sheet of paper here. This is Dr. Stuart Brown. He takes people's play history. This is my play history. And it's we won't bother reading through all of it, but it's an important thing to do if you're wanting to think about, well, why is play important for our children, but also what can I do in my life that's more playful? Okay. So what I'd ask you guys is, what are your play memories? You can pop them in the chat, or you can talk in the microphone. What did you do when you were a youngster outdoors? Who were you with? How did you feel? What kind of stuff did you get up to?
I was usually with my younger sister. It's less than 2 years between us, and we played outside together a lot. We did a lot of climbing trees, playing in bushes, making kitchens underneath rhododendron trees. We had a climbing frame and a slide, and when we were a wee bit older, we had bicycles and went sort of exploring the bit of rough ground down behind our house. We were very lucky to always have a bit of space very close to the house that we could just go and play in without having to cross busy roads or anything.
Great. Going exploring the woods with my best friend and sister, walking in the streams. Okay. Anyone else? I can't actually see how many folk are in. 9. A lot of football. Yes. I see there a comment up there. Yep, attachment is important, extremely important. We have play urges from very early on. And attachment is one of these things that is important to allow children then to explore and play. A lot of football. In these experiences, do people have adults supervising them? Jenny making imaginary worlds, hide and seek outside.
Yeah, that's a bit about, you know, other people in the
I don't know what happened there.
I thought that was part of the talk.
Yeah, that's it. Just
yeah.
Boom. Okay, let's see what happens. I think I might be having, my internet might be beginning to break down. Okay, I was just mentioning there's an early learning and childcare group in a province of China called Angie Play, and that's exactly how they set up their childcare. They asked all the older people in the community, what did you do when you were kids? And they created it from there. and it's now kind of world leading. So we've talked about play, and it just so happens that outdoors is the best place to play, in my opinion. I can't see the chat anymore, so that's the only thing. Let me see if I can join again, just in case there's any questions as we go along. That's it. Okay. So yeah, nature happens to be one of the best places for play. This is a little bit about the brain and why being outdoors is important. And, you know, I'm no expert on what happens in your brain, but we make connections, and the most connections we make in our brain are around 2 years old. And then what happens is your brain starts getting rid of the connections that haven't been repeated that often. Okay, so you can imagine what happens if your experiences are one of these two. If I can move the pictures along. And you know that picture on the left, that's a real thing. You know, that's a product you can buy now, I believe. We have turned into a little bit of a society that moves around in boxes, you know, from our house to our car to another building, from one to the next. And if we don't have experiences of nature early enough, then being in nature as we get older is difficult. I mean, in the outdoor nursery, this is anecdotal, but we've had children who find it extremely difficult to navigate anything other than flat ground. Okay, so our development is impeded if we've not got access to these experiences. In nature, you can have those kind of wow experiences or one of a kind experiences, okay, because nature is unpredictable. So we need to have those experiences. They aid in our development. And this is from one of our nurseries near Inverness. What are the benefits of playing outdoors? Okay, so they're innumerable. However, there's health and well-being benefits, space and freedom, playing with natural resources, self-directed and free play opportunities. So it doesn't always have to be organized. When I started my kind of early years journey, I worked in a lot of nurseries where every moment of the day was organized, okay? And what I did was fought against that and actually made it that only very small parts of the day were organized. Being outside is a sensory experience, which is really important for development, as is exposure to risky play opportunities. We need risk, okay? Eliminating all risk is much more harmful than having a bit of risk in our lives. And we need our children to develop a love of nature and the outdoors. Some of the well-being benefits. Better immune systems. We've actually had children at the nurseries I've worked at which wouldn't be able to be in an indoor nursery because of immune deficiency. So being outside is actually safer or better for our bodies. This bit of research down in the bottom there, let them eat dirt. You know, there's proof. We need to ingest a little bit of dirt, right? Well, kids need structure. Maybe kids need routine, but I wouldn't. Structures maybe for me is not the word that I'd use. I'd say kids need a bit of routine, and you can have routine plus children making their own way. And sometimes restricting our young people can cause issues where it appears to us that they need extra support when maybe the environment needs to change. Spending time outdoors, children can be more resilient, build up the resilience, spend time in different weathers, learn to cope with that. They need time to get into kind of arguments with their friends and work those out rather than having people work them out for them. There's also a author called Richard Louv who wrote the book at the bottom there called Last Child in the Woods, and he talks about children having nature deficit disorder. So that's something that playing outdoors can help with. Playing outdoors can be a sensory experience, and not just this seeing and hearing, but the important senses of touch, balance. There's something called the vestibular system, which is getting to know kind of your position in the world, you know, swinging upside down, hanging from tree branches. No, that might not be something that you're doing up there. And proprioception, understanding your body and being able to regulate it. Okay, we need to have lots of different experiences with our body before we're ready to write, etc. Health and safety. Yep, health and safety is important, but we live in a kind of, we're overly thinking about it sometimes. The position that I would take as a nursery manager or working outdoors with children, as I have for 15 plus years, is what you'd call a risk-benefit approach, where you look at the benefits of what you're doing first, and then you look at the risks, okay? Also, there's a little kind of matter of how we view children, and do we trust our children? Do we see them as capable? And often we don't, and I've got a little bit more about that in a wee minute. Risky play is the key to managing our and regulating our emotions. We need risky play. We can all think back to our own childhoods and some of the stuff we got up to, right? I'm sure you're all thinking of something that you did when you were younger that was maybe a bit risky or dangerous. You can pop it in the chat if you want. We used to make jumps for our bikes, and they were not safe at all. But, you know, we were okay. And there's a lot of health and safety myths out there. You might remember in the papers that you can't play with conkers. You have to wear, you know, goggles. But that's a complete myth. Somebody just made that up. If children never have to assess risk, they won't learn to risk assess for themselves. That's exactly right, Christina. So that's why they need risky play. And, you know, I'm certainly seeing in some cases a group of young people who find it difficult to do anything without an adult's permission, okay, or being told what to do. And I see that as part of the issue there, is that they haven't been allowed this freedom to play. Now, I hesitate to play this video, but we'll see if it works. But this is just a 5-year-old girl playing in the outdoors and being able to play in a risky way. So let's see if it works. Okay, pretty impressive, I'd say, for a 4-year-old. But a 4-year-old that's been allowed to, test herself, that knows her capabilities. I've worked with plenty of children. They'll go to climb a tree. I know tree climbing is maybe not a great example, but they'll always say, "I'm going to climb to the top," and they go as far as they're comfortable and come back down. The dangerous thing for an adult to do is to put them up into a tree or to shout something like, "Be careful." Okay, nature. This isn't a great quote because it's David Attenborough talking about living in a city, which maybe isn't as relevant to you guys, but you might have seen the book down at where this is based on words being left out of the dictionary, words like acorn and other words to do with nature. Children can recognize brands more easily than they can things in nature. And one of my favorite books there on the bottom right is James Hunter's On the Other Side of Sorrow. In Gaelic culture, there's a strong connection with the natural world. And how can we kind of recapture that, right, for our young people? One of the things we work on at UHI is this idea of that there's only 2% of the workforce in early learning and childcare are male. I'm the first lecturer in childcare that Inverness College has ever had. We treat children differently based on gender. There's no getting past it, and both boys and girls suffer because of that. We concentrate on girls' physical attributes while we concentrate on what boys are capable of physically, and it's to both of their detriments. In the outdoors, that becomes a more level playing field when we allow them to play naturally as they want to, rather than what happens sometimes in indoor nurseries is the play is gendered. Okay, so boys play at this and girls play at that. When in the outdoors, children just play as they want to. Promoting emotional intelligence, boys in general have less emotional literacy than girls, so we need to try and change that, and play can help. This is similar to that at the start, the headline about children being not being allowed out on their own until they're 11. This is just an example of 3 generations in a town in England and how far each generation was allowed to go unsupervised. And you can see it goes from a few miles back in the early 1900s to end of the street. Okay. And I guess as parents, educators, etc., we've got to question, well, what's really changed in that time? And what's the effect that's going to have on our children? We need to give them freedom, time, and space, and that's what can happen in the outdoors. That's my son. He's 4 in that picture, and he was able to climb up to the top of this. It's one of these pillboxes, from the war. He was able to get up there on his own, so he was able to jump down on his own. How we view children, I'm just moving along quickly because I realize our time is slightly shorter with my okay, I'm just going to read from something, if you give me a sec. How we view children is important. One of the reasons I got into lecturing was I went around a lot of nurseries, and there was some great practice, but also there was some practice where I thought, it's not just the outdoors people need to, work on. It's how they view children. A chap called Malaguzzi, he is the co-founder of the Reggio Emilia approach in Italy to childcare, and he talks about these 3 views of the child, and maybe have a think about which one you sit under. The first image, so number 1, the sleeping child, is a child that learns by remembering what has been said and then reproducing this knowledge. One views the child like a lump of clay that needs to be formed, an empty vessel that needs to be filled with knowledge. The child has no virtue of its own. It's poor and passive. It sleeps. It's a child that you do not listen to and do not enter a dialogue with. Knowledge can be injected by an adult that knows and can. Number 2 is the awake but poor child that is steered. The second image of the child is one that learns by understanding. The child has resources, but it is about the adult stimulating the child so that it has the opportunity to grow. This is an awake but passive child that doesn't yet walk on their own legs. The child has no responsibility for their own knowledge, but is steered by others. And then there's a rich child, third child that wants to grow, learn, and know. It is a child that can create its own knowledge. It's a child with inherent power. This child also needs an adult, but not an adult that will protect or act as a guard, but an adult that can construct the world together with. Since the child cannot manage to construct everything by themselves, they need an adult who can listen and see, an adult with big ears and big eyes, an adult to enter dialogues with. Okay. That's actually my granny in North Uist. I just like that photo. I use it sometimes when talking to people about outdoor nurseries because, you know, our kids that are at the outdoor nurseries sometimes look a bit similar, you know, dirty feet and legs. She's obviously not that happy because somebody's slapped a white dress on her for the photo. And I'm not romanticizing that she had an easy life or childhood, but she had an childhood in nature, probably playing outdoors quite a lot, that play and work were mixed a little bit. So that's the kind of thing I think we should be aiming for. I'm introducing you to lots of people here. This chap's called Patrick Geddes. He was a town planner from Edinburgh, but he talked about the education of the heart, the head, the hand, and the head. So that picture on the right being the heart, right? Learning through awe and wonder, and then moving on to the hands, so doing, and then the head, kind of more formal academic work. And we can't go to school and learn to read and write without that kind of education of the heart. Another interesting person is Emmy Pickler. You might have heard of Pickler, I'm not sure. She talked about development of the child unfolding. Okay, so everybody develops at different rates. This was in Hungary, at Budapest. If you give children enough space and possibilities for free movement, they will move as gracefully and beautifully as animals. Quite often we try to move development along, right? We try and set our children up into these little things. We had one, I'm sure, for one of our kids. We try and get them to walk quickly. People ask, is your child walking yet? But actually, it all happens naturally if we allow it. There are some challenges with outdoor play. Precipitation, right? We live in Scotland. It can be very wet. But if we are aware of that, then we're fine. Perceptions of play. The image on the top right there, you know, some people might view that as these children not having enough. However, they're deeply engaged in something. And the one on the bottom there, this child is showing all the early kind of writing skills, just in a different way than maybe we're used to. And this concept of being ready for primary school, what does that actually mean? And I often think primary school should be ready for our children. But being ready is about being able to deal with some of the social aspects of being in a group, and writing comes later, reading comes later. This is my friend Peter Gray again, just saying that how we view the child can have consequences. And sadly, in many cases, the assumption is that children are in need of direction and supervision, and this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, that children become convinced of their own incompetence and may act accordingly. The surest way to foster any trait in a person is to treat that person if he or she already has it. So the message may be, we should trust our children can know what they're doing. Right, I'll be quick here because I know time's running out, another few minutes and then questions. But what can we do this summer? Here's just some ideas, and the second column, I'm by no way bashing any of these things. It's just to know that definition we had to play at the beginning. What can help with that? Well, what I'm trying to do here in Fochabers is the idea of a playborhood where parents are connected and we can allow, and we've identified places where children can safely play. There are some great examples of adventure or democratic playgrounds, particularly near Glasgow, where children create their own playground. Boredom, right? Let your kids get bored. Okay, we're too quick to give them things to do. Boredom is where creativity comes from, right? Summer holidays used to be full of boredom, and then all of a sudden you'd have an adventure. As we've talked about, risk in nature, loose parts, which I'll show you in a wee second, and that secure base from which then children can thrive. And the things that can shrink play, there is a trend called overparenting, where as parents, and it's only out of kindness, but we control too much of our children's lives. Things like play dates can shrink play depending on what happens. As we mentioned earlier, organized sports can shrink play, as can homework. Perceived risks, and then play replacements. Now, the Daily Mile, the Daily Mile's a great thing. However, if we allowed our children to play for that time rather than just walk in a big circle or run in a big circle, they would get way more benefits. Organized activities and toys as well, right? Toys generally have a defined use where, in a minute, I think I'll show you some loose parts play. We can also, when we're outside with our children, we can look for these features. David Sobel is a researcher who identified 7 principles in the way that children play, no matter what their gender, their socioeconomic background, their religion. Across the planet, children play in these ways. They look for adventure, so running around and jumping. They look for fantasy and imagination. They look for animals. They make maps and paths. They look for special places where they can hide. They like small worlds. Somebody talked about that earlier. And they like to gather things and hunt for things. Children play in these ways no matter where. So when designing our outdoor nurseries, we use these principles to make sure that that was there. A little bit on loose parts play. Nicholson's theory of loose parts play is just that if you give children items that are not defined, that can be moved around, that can have several purposes, their play will be much greater than by giving them toys, basically. And, we all know that a stick is not just a stick, it's also a magic wand and a sword and a gun and all sorts of things, right? So give children things that they can turn into their own, basically. Sand, you've got plenty of sand up in the islands, that's a good loose part. This is just an example for you. This is like, I've got the smallest garden in the world, and this is what we've done with my kids. We've made it fairly simple, but it hits quite a few of those principles. Researcher called Ellen Sandsetter says we need to provide these things for children to experience risky play. So heights, real or imagined, speed, tools. So at our nurseries, we did allow children to use real tools, spades, hammers and nails, all that kind of stuff. Elements, so fire, for example, rough and tumble, okay. And there's some research that says rough and tumble is really important. In the 90s, there was a trend to stop children in nurseries from doing rough and tumble play, because the idea was There's been a rise in domestic abuse, and it was thought if we stop boys from playing in a rough way, they won't continue with that behavior when they get older. But almost the opposite is true. We don't learn our limits, etc., if we don't play in a rough and tumble way. And disappearing and getting lost, right? We need places to hide. I'm nearly there. This is one of my favorite photos. These two are discussing if they should jump or not. Okay. And we gave them the time to do that, and they needed the time to do that. You can imagine somebody just coming in and saying, oh, you two step back from there, or be careful. Actually, I think, yeah, be careful. But it's the worst thing you can do, because if you shout be careful when they're deep in conversation, it might startle them, and that's when accidents happen. Some of the things you can say, if you're worried about risk, is what do we have to be careful of? How are we going to keep ourselves safe? Do you feel safe? And most of the time, I'd say children will respond to these. I'm not sure where I got this, right? It's the Harvard School of something, and it's just about 10 skills people will need in the future. Okay, and if you look down that list, I think quite a lot of them would be involved in play in some form. You'll notice none of them really look at the skills that we often race for our children to have, which are more school-based skills. But yeah, most of these, I think, if we allow our children to play more, it can be part of their toolkit. And let me just check. I popped this picture in. You know, sometimes play mirrors work in some ways, and that's okay, because you know, there is an idea that I had in terms of what the kind of rural economy and, you know, like the crofting community, etc., that play in some ways should mirror work. These guys, I think, were testing. We'd been given some pallets, and they were putting them together. And lastly, this is from the Summer of Play campaign. The 3 things they say about the summer is allow children to have fun and express themselves through play, create opportunities for children to play with their friends, and give them space, time, and opportunities for free play. Okay. Sorry, I rushed through the end there. However, thank you for your attention.
This is more just a comment. You can see we've got a 19-month-old here, and just yesterday, I think I was saying to DJ, I got no idea if I should step in or not, as she clambered up in her little baby chair. And I looked behind her and saw her little wooden kitchen. I thought, right, if she falls back, she'll smack her head. It won't kill her. We just have a lot of tears. I think I'll just let her go for it. But I really like your idea about, I entirely agree about basically teaching children how to analyze risk themselves. That's really the only way they're going to be safe. And that's great to be able to ask questions of an older child, but with a little one, I'm a first time mum, don't have lots of little cousins and so on. And it's just a comment really, that it's really hard sometimes to know what is an appropriate risk to let a particular child take and what isn't. I suppose I just watch her, you know, and see what she's comfortable with. We've recently discovered she loves going fast down the slide. And you're just watching her face. It's like, okay, no, she's all right with that. All right, I'll let her go a little bit further. And okay, she's seen. Oh, went over the line there. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I look forward to the day where I can more verbally help teach her how to do risk analysis.
But at the moment, the moment you can obviously see as well in her face, you know, because you know her well, like how she's responding. So the one thing in the nurseries anyway, and we had the first outdoor nursery with babies, was, you know, we can create an environment where we don't eliminate all the risks, but we make sure it's safe. the thing to do is watch, and then maybe at that point where usually you would say something, unless it's something extremely dangerous, obviously, you just wait a tiny bit longer, you know? So you like count to 3 or count to 5, you know, and you might build it up a little bit. Jenny's just saying, we allow the boys lots of freedom in the garden. Here to help, 7 and 3 years old. And that's the thing, it's being there, that if the children know that you're available and that you're that secure base, then they can go off and explore. That's right. And it depends also if you're going to have a second, because when you have your second, then they do everything. Your first one doesn't.
So this summer is a summer of outdoor play. It's a campaign.
Yes. And on that second slide, there was the link to the website. So I think they've got some like ideas and things for folk there. But yeah, basically let them out, let them play.
I think I'm seeing at university level, I'm seeing the effect of a lot of helicopter parenting and overparenting with 17, 18-year-olds coming in without having the confidence and the capacity. They do have the capacity, but it hasn't been developed. They don't have the confidence. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, we had a Cork Urban example a number of years ago where a student's father insisted on turning up to student induction to accompany his daughter for the 2-day accommodation. So he went and got his own B&B and basically literally hovered over the poor girl the entire time. That was an extreme example, but it really brought it home, and it's very incapacitating for the...
And you know, that's the thing, if the experiences that we have as children, if you imagine not ever having been really allowed to decide for yourself what your plan is, what you're going to do today, then of course when you're left to go out on your own, then you're kind of crippled by that. And certainly you know, some of my students this year, I said, right, I want you to build a fort in your house with blankets, and some of them had never done it, you know, whereas that may have been a standard thing that most of us have done as children, you know. There's expectation as well. I suppose when I joined nurseries, the parents expected, you know, we're going to get this artwork at the end of each day. The kids have produced something, but generally it was produced with a lot of help from an adult. And when they stopped getting that stuff and they got the normal, like what kids actually produced, they were, you know, a little bit upset to begin with.
So I've seen that kind of thing as well. I've seen parents being shocked at, you know, what was over-structured and over-organized, and then when the child was left to do their own thing, unfortunately, the parent expressed disappointment rather than, yeah, I know, I've seen that.
I mean, I've got one on the wall. I saw on the day the kids came out of school with, you know, 20 copies of the same thing, really, because it was so directed. And of course, they were happy and proud of it. But yeah, you've got to think of what is missing from that and what the children aren't getting by not being allowed to just be creative.
ASD kids, somebody said in the chat. What about special needs?
Yeah, I mentioned that at the time when I read that. So, you know, I was just saying that for me, the structure, I'd say routine's the thing that children need and not structure. And special needs is about knowing the child, you know, and it's about, yeah, how can we allow everyone to play in their way freely? So yeah, less structure, more some routine.
Well, on that note, less structure, more routine. Thank you very much, Alistair.
No problem at all. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. It's recorded, so it'll be available. It'll be available for people to see later on as well.